Islam is a religion of peace. It is a religion of submission to the Creator, and it is a religion of tolerance.
Islam was formed as a result of the prophethood of Muhammad.
Islam has an incredibly high respect for the human being and the capacity for a human being to know God at the deepest level.
Islam is not connected necessarily to the Middle East, but it merely shows that the person is submitting to the will of God, trying to lead a good life and to find peace in this world and the hereafter.
Islam isn't something that comes from a faraway land or is totally and utterly, completely foreign, but that it really is a continuation of the Abrahamic tradition.
Islam is a religion of peace. It is a religion of submission to the Creator, and it is a religion of tolerance.
God isn't forcing you to do what you're doing. You are telling yourself that God is the ultimate creator. God knows what is best for me. I willfully submit myself to the will of God.
Islam may be defined in one of several ways. Linguistically, the word Islam is derived from the Arabic word salam. This word is almost identical to the more familiar Hebrew word shalom and means the same, peace. Islam may also be considered the religion, or more appropriately, the way of life, of the sociological grouping of hundreds of millions of people around the world who call themselves Muslim. However, the deeper and more profound meaning of Islam is in its understanding of the relationship between the Creator and the created, that the purpose of all of creation is to worship the Creator, God Almighty, and that we, as human beings, have the freedom to choose to worship, to accept, or reject God. Islam is that choice, the choice of accepting God's supreme authority above one's own.
A Muslim is one who submits to do the will of God. And so a Muslim can come from any country, speak any language, be of any color. Islam is not restricted to any linguistic group. And as a matter of fact, Arabic-speaking Muslims are a minority. The largest Muslim country is Indonesia. And that is interesting and surprising to a lot of people, to find that Islam is not connected necessarily to the Middle East, but it merely shows that the person is submitting to the will of God, trying to lead a good life and to find peace in this world and the hereafter.
Many think that all Muslims are Arabs and all Arabs are Muslims. This is simply not true. Less than 15% of Muslims are of Arab ethnicity. There are Christian Arabs, Jewish Arabs, and Arabs that do not follow any particular faith or religion. The largest Muslim community is found in Indonesia. There are, in fact, more Muslims in Indonesia than all the Muslims in all the Arab countries combined. Large parts of Asia, particularly the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, are Muslim. Almost all the Central Asian republics and the majority of people in Africa are Muslim. Significant Muslim minorities are found in China, Russia, Europe, Canada, and the United States. It is estimated that over 8 million Muslims live in the United States. They represent every culture, ethnicity, and race. They come from all social demographics and contribute to American society in many ways.
The American Muslim community is, in fact, international in a place like the United States. When you look at the American Muslim community, you have, first of all, the two large groups, African American, if you will, indigenous Muslims, and then you have immigrant in second, third, and fourth generation. But ethnically, you've got Arabs, you've got South Asians, Southeast Asians, you've got Africans, you've got Central Asians, you've got Turks, you've got an enormous diversity.
Like Judaism and Christianity, Islam is a monotheistic faith. In fact, within Islam, the concept of one God is even more so emphasized than any other faith. There is no deity but God. There is only one God. This is not just a testimony of faith or litany that Muslims recite, but it is the very basis of Islam.
The concept of Tawheed, which is unity of God, that God is one, is central to the Abrahamic traditions, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. Christianity, the difference between Christianity and Islam is that Christianity introduces the concept of God's personalities, what's called a persona in traditional Catholicism. And persona in Latin means a mask. So what the Christians term as the Godhead is masked by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But they actually do believe, if you look in all the theology books of the Catholics, they believe in a unified God that has no limits, is not determined by time and space. They have the same understandings, which is why we believe ultimately that they are monotheists.
The Islamic community uses usually the term Allah, but we believe that is the same God as all of the rest of us worship.
Muslims respect and love all the holy men or prophets whose stories are found in the Bible.
Jesus talked about the Paraclete, the intercessor, which is the meaning of Parakletos, and that's the name of the Prophet Muhammad, is Muhammad al-Shafi', Muhammad the intercessor.
Mary is mentioned more times in the Quran, the Islamic revelation, than she is even in the Gospels.
We like the Quran very much, and we consider it sort of another book of the New Testament.
If you compare Islamic belief about Jesus and God to the earliest Christians, then you can hardly tell a difference.
There are hundreds of names throughout both the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. The Islamic community uses usually the term Allah, but we believe that is the same God as all of the rest of us worship.
Allah is the proper Arabic name for God. Muslims believe in and worship the same God that Jews and Christians worship. Allah is a unique term with no plural and no gender. It predates Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, and it was also used in the form of Ilah, and Elohim by David, Moses, Jesus, and other messengers of God, peace be upon them all.
If you go to many Middle Eastern or African countries, and you go to any church, you would hear them refer to God as Allah, because that is the word in those languages to speak about God. So what is the difference really? I think that there is really no difference. It is just how we think about God, and we speak about God with different names and different ways, depending on the experience and the scripture and the tradition that we have.
The theological background of Islam, the historical antecedents of Islam, which are the same as Christianity and Judaism, we are clearly worshiping the same God.
There's no doubt in my mind that we are under the same God, and that Allah is the name for God in Islamic tradition. I think the Islamic concept of God, the understanding of God, God is sovereign. God holds the world together. God, I smile because I want to say God is God, and there is none like Him. And that is something that binds all humans together, humanity together. And what we miss in America in many ways, because of our brash culture, there's a lot of wonderful freedom in America, but because we're free, there's also a lot of trashy culture. And there's also, frankly, I think a lot of trashy religion. And what this culture could recover, and I think Islamic peoples in America could help us recover, is what I call the sovereignty and priority of God. What it is to be under God, who holds us all in being. And over again, when one thinks as a Christian, I think of the way the name of Allah is invoked over and over again with great awe, great reverence. I think that is Islam's great contribution to our recovering, our Christians recovering their own sense of the transcendent, their own sense of the what I would call the otherness of God, the majesty of God, which in many ways our culture has lost.
Islam is not a new faith. Muslims believe that it is the same truth that God revealed through all his prophets to every people. For a fifth of the world's population, Islam is not just a religion, but a complete way of life. Muslims come from all races, nationalities, and cultures across the globe. They have varied customs, languages, foods, and dress. Even the way they practice Islam may be different, yet they all consider themselves Muslim.
Muslims are those who submit to do the will of Allah. They surrender to the Creator. They are seeking peace in this life and in the hereafter. And a Muslim is not restricted to the Middle East. A Muslim can come from any nation, come from any tribe. There are millions of Muslims in China, in India, in the former Soviet states, throughout Europe, Africa, the Americas. Everywhere in the world, you can find somebody who is a Muslim.
In the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful, it is my pleasure to be with you here today to speak about the Quran. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit abbreviated because I have to leave to the airport as soon as we're done here. But actually, my own experience with the Quran is what led me to eventually become a Muslim. And so that is why it takes me, I get great pleasure to speak in particular to non-Muslims about the Quran and try to introduce them to the Quran so that maybe they can share some of the same experiences and the same feelings that I had towards the Quran. So I came from I'm American, a traditional American, I guess, Christian background. And so when I started to read and study about Islam, that was the background that I was coming from. And so there are many aspects of the Quran that affected me in many ways. And one of the first aspects that I think is very important has to do with the preservation of the Quran. Because if we're going to speak about following, if we're going to say that we believe in God and we agree upon the fact that we believe in God, and even if we accept the fact or the concept of revelation from God, and if we want to follow this revelation, one of the first and most important aspects is that we have to have a strong reason to believe that this revelation has actually been preserved from its original source. It does not make any sense, really, to say that I'm going to follow God's revelation when we realize or when we know that what we're holding in our hands perhaps has not been preserved. Or we may have good reason to believe that it hasn't been preserved. So one of the first things that stuck out to me with respect to the Quran has to do with the preservation of the Quran. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ for over a period of 23 years. And actually I don't have, well, they have copies of it outside, so you can see the size of it. And so this book was passed on by the Prophet Muhammad to his followers, and it has been preserved minutely since that time to this day. And as a non-Muslim reading about Islam, I was somewhat surprised by how many of the non-Muslims, many of them who were not very polite in their writings to Islam, if I may use a politically correct way of describing their stance. But even they admitted and they accepted the fact that the Quran that we have today is actually the Quran that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Well, they didn't say that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. It was the Quran that the Prophet Muhammad taught or passed on to his companions over 1400 years ago. And as I said, this was a very significant point with respect to me, because I had actually studied the history of the Bible before that time. And I'm obviously not going to get into the details of that kind of discussion here. But I can just say that the history of the Quran is completely different from the history of the Bible. And from the earliest days, this Quran was known and recognized and preserved. It was not compiled by later councils, some hundreds or 200s or 300 years ago, later, after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So this is one thing that stood out to me, and as I said, this was of great significance to me, in the sense that, as I said, if we're going to follow something that comes from God, then we have to make sure that what we have is actually that thing that has come from God. And then with respect to the teachings of the Quran also, and what the Quran contains. One of the aspects of the Quran is the fact that throughout the Quran, God is telling human beings to think and to ponder. And the thing that God is calling mankind to in the Quran is, as the Muslim scholars say, it is actually something that is consistent with their nature. It is something understandable to the human being, because this is actually the nature, the natural way that human beings have been created. And so therefore God throughout the Quran tells you to ponder over the creation and think about things. And this call and this argument, the conclusion of it, is that you will recognize the fact that there's actually only one Creator, and that this Creator is deserving of worship and so forth. And so therefore there's no, so to speak, leap of faith in Islam. The definition of faith in Islam from an Islamic perspective, from a Quranic perspective, is not to believe in something that you cannot prove. Many people in the West, when they think of faith, they're talking about believing something that is a mystery or something that you cannot prove and so forth. This is not the way of the Quran. The Quran is calling people to a truth that they can recognize, a truth that they can understand. And as I said, the Muslim scholars explain this by the fact that this truth is actually what their whole nature is all about. This is what their soul is seeking.
Allah said about His ability to return us back to life perfectly on the day of resurrection. Yes, we are able to fashion in perfect order the very tips of His fingers. 1400 years ago, some people wondered why God chose to mention the fingertips instead of mentioning something more complicated like the kidney or the eye. Today, science proved that this part of the body is one of the most complicated parts, because it is carrying a unique fingerprint. Allah said in the Quran, "Whoever Allah guides, He opens his heart for Islam, and whoever He lets go astray, He makes his chest constrain as if he is ascending gradually in the sky." 14 centuries ago, who could have known that as a man ascends gradually in the sky, oxygen decreases, leading to the feeling of chest tightness? These must be the words of the Creator, Allah.
So the fact that the Quran was continually calling people to think and to ponder, and giving them
$1,400 years ago, when the world was immersed in darkness, the Quran was revealed, which brought light to a beleaguered world. And whereas the earlier books came with many scientific mistakes, due to the hand of man having delved into them, the Quran had none of these contradictions. The world thought there could be no reconciliation between religion and science. But the Quran mentioned many scientific facts in great detail, like how a human being developed in the mother's womb, and described other scientific facts which amaze the world's renowned scientists and scientific community. Such was the impact of these revelations that the first Islamic medical conference was held at the Arab League building, Cairo, Egypt, on the 26th of September, 1985.
This is a leech, and this is the human embryo, about 23 days. I think you have to agree that the similarity between these structures is amazing. Muhammad could not have known these facts about human development in the 7th century because most of them were not discovered until the 20th century. It has been a great pleasure for me to help clarify statements in the Quran about human development. It is clear to me that these statements must have come to Muhammad from God or Allah, because almost all of this knowledge was not discovered until many centuries later. This proves to me that Muhammad must have been a messenger of God or Allah.
The key word in both is al-Ghaib. At this stage is known to no one except Allah. Summary. The Quran describes not only the development of external form, but emphasizes also the internal stages, the stages inside the embryo of its creation and development, emphasizing major events recognized by contemporary science. Thank you for your attention. As a scientist, I can only deal with things which I can specifically see. I can understand embryology and developmental biology. I can understand the words that are translated to me from the Quran. As I gave the example before, if I were to transpose myself into that era, knowing what I do today and describing things, I could not describe the things which were described. I see no reason, I see no evidence for the fact to refute the concept that this individual, Muhammad, had to be developing this information from someplace. So I see nothing here in conflict with the concept that divine intervention was involved in what he was.
The rapid growth and dramatic changes which occur after the bones have been clothed by muscles have been mentioned in the Holy Quran 1400 years ago.
Muhammad was a very ordinary man. He couldn't have read, didn't know to write. In fact, he was illiterate. And we're talking about 1200 years ago. You have someone, a literate person, making profound pronouncements and statements that are amazingly accurate of a scientific nature. And I personally can't see how this could be a mere chance. There are too many accuracies. And like Dr. Moore, I have no difficulty in my mind reconciling that this is a divine inspiration or revelation which led him to these statements.
Surah 79, Ayah 32 states, also in the context of creation, and the mountains hath he firmly fixed. Similar mention of mountains is found in several other surahs. It is permissible to interpret this to imply that mountains are rooted and that modern geophysics has established deep crustal roots for the axial parts of mountain systems at converging plate boundaries. We need research into the history of early Middle Eastern oral traditions to know whether, in fact, such historical events have been reported. If there is no such record, it strengthens the belief that God transmitted through Muhammad bits of his knowledge that we have only discovered for ourselves in recent times.
In fact, until the time of the ancient Greeks and after, science and magic were closely joined. No such distinctive and complete record of human development existed before the Quran. In a relatively few ayah is contained a rather comprehensive description of human development from the time of commingling of the gametes through organogenesis. No such distinct and complete record of human development, such as classification, terminology, and description, existed previously. In most, if not all instances, this description antedates by many centuries the recording of the various stages of human embryonic and fetal development recorded in the traditional scientific literature.
I find it very interesting that this sort of information is in the ancient scriptures of the Holy Quran, and I have no way of knowing where they would come from, but I think it is extremely interesting that they are there and that this work is going on to discover the meaning of some of the passages. Well, I would think it must be the divine being.
Thinking of many of these questions and thinking where Muhammad came from, he was after all a Bedouin. I think it is almost impossible that he could have known about things like the common origin of the universe, because scientists have only found out within the last few years, with very complicated and advanced technological methods, that this is the case. Somebody who did not know something about nuclear physics 1400 years ago could not, I think, be in a position to find out from his own mind, for instance, that the earth and the heavens had the same origin, or many other of the questions that we have discussed here.
"14 centuries ago, God sent down to humanity the Quran as a book of guidance. He called upon people to be guided to the truth by adhering to this book. Since the day of its revelation to the day of resurrection, this last divine book will remain the sole guide for humanity.